It's my favorite time of the year. And to get us in the right mood for spooky season, we need to start with a pumpkin spice latte type of video. So let's all just sit back and relax right next to our newly bought Halloween decorations and ramble about horror for 20, 30, 40 minutes, who knows? And the topic we're going to be talking about for today's rambling is the past, present, and future of some of the major franchises out right now. But because there's so much to talk about and remember, we're going to be splitting them into little categories to make it easier to stay on topic. The first category is going to be about dead timelines. You could also call this the reboot category because a lot of the major players in the horror franchises have at least one reboot timeline that died before it ever got a trilogy or even a single sequel. An easy example of this is the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise.
How long have you been awake?
Way too long. I haven't slept in 3 days.
The 2010 reboot was a huge flop with both critics and audiences, and now the franchise has laid dormant ever since. And I'm not in the minority here. I do agree with most of the people who don't like this film, and no one should be surprised that it didn't get any sequels. Hopefully there's some room for Freddy Krueger in the future, but until then, I think it's only fair that we move on to his opponent in the ring. The Friday the 13th franchise had a reboot back in 2009. And I actually thought that reboot was pretty decent. And I think that version of Friday the 13th deserved at least a couple more sequels because Survivalist Jason was a different enough kind of Jason that I would have appreciated seeing what other kind of kills and traps they could have come up with for him to utilize. Unfortunately, the rights ended up in limbo before any sequels had been made because of the lawsuit from the writer of the original Friday the 13th. Victor Miller was trying to get his rights back, and luckily that lawsuit was recently settled. But that does mean that this timeline is pretty much dead in the water to make way for newer ideas. And we'll talk about some of those newer ideas later, but for now, let's talk about a reboot that nobody asked for.
Something's wrong with Chucky.
And that's the Child's Play reboot. The film itself wasn't all that bad. Swap out the Chucky pieces and the film absolutely could have worked as a little standalone film. But as a Chucky film, what in the world was this studio thinking? They decided to make a Chucky film where all of the parts that made Chucky iconic had been stripped away at the same time that the original creator was working on a Chucky TV show and he didn't approve of the film being made. That's probably the worst horror reboot strategy I've ever seen. Just kidding. It's actually the second worst strategy I've ever seen. The actual worst horror reboot strategy is from this next reboot.
Where's Agnes? What are you doing?
Honest question. Has there ever been a bigger power gap between films than the Black Christmas franchise? The original is an absolute horror classic. The remake in 2006 was kind of like taking a beautiful song and creating the Techno Dance Club remix, which isn't as great as the original, but man, at least it's still music. But then the 2019 reboot comes along and takes that same beautiful song and somehow accidentally replaced all the lyrics with the live reading of the Wikipedia page for misogyny. It's just a massive tragedy of a franchise that absolutely deserved better. Before we talk about the multiple dead timelines of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween franchises, I just wanted to run through some smaller dead timelines that I don't think deserve more than a few seconds. Leprechaun had a reboot made by WWE back in 2014 called Leprechaun Origins. Reminding you of its existence should be a crime in Ireland. Next, the Resident Evil franchise had a TV show. Strong emphasis on had a TV show. Also, I Know What You Did Last Summer received a TV show in 2021. Unfortunately for them, the last thing they did last summer was get canceled. Alright, let's move on from the losers. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise is honestly a wild one. The original timeline is an insane mess that's never actually made sense. It absolutely needed to be rebooted if the franchise wanted to see any future mainstream success that didn't confuse everyone.
I'm gonna die.
The reboot finally came along in 2003, and it's actually became the trend starter for the horror remake explosion we got back in the 2000s. It made big money for the time, and it received a prequel in 2006. But that's as far as that timeline got. I would have been fine with at least one more sequel just to complete a trilogy before moving on, but it didn't happen. Instead, they made a sequel to the original 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 2013 called Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3D. I don't know if I'm just dumb and misunderstood the film, but it kind of felt like they attempted to make Leatherface into a sort of anti-hero, didn't they?
Do your thing, cuz.
Like, the main bad guys aren't even Leatherface. The first guy killed by Leatherface is some scumbag hitchhiker. Even her friends are kind of portrayed as like cheaters and bad people. You would think making a strange decision like this would have killed this timeline, but they actually decided to make a prequel. And this prequel featured a Leatherface that's totally a normal guy. He was completely sane and well-spoken until the very end when his face gets disfigured. It was a baffling choice, and I still don't understand the reasoning behind it. Luckily, hardly anybody watched that film because it was originally released on DirecTV exclusively, and then they quickly released it to theaters to let it flop so they could move on and forget about it. And we will be doing the same. The other franchise that can't seem to make up its mind is the Halloween franchise. The original timeline, which most people call the Jamie Lloyd or Thorne timeline, started off strong and then slowly descended into Dr. Loomis versus a cult. It was only a matter of time before the studio wanted something new. So in 1998, we got H2O, a horror film about the dangers of dehydration. The killer is a giant bottle of Dasani, and it's angry that people don't like drinking Dasani. It was only a matter of time before the studio wanted something new, so we got H20, also known as Halloween 20 years later, which brought back Laurie Strode and gave her a hip young teenage son and features LL Cool J as a security guard that dreams of being an erotica writer. Despite that lackluster description I just gave, I actually really liked the film. Having Laurie face off against Michael and giving what seemed like a definitive end to Michael was pretty cool. But unfortunately, this film is in the same timeline as Halloween Resurrection, so it will forever be tainted by that. Hey, Rob Zombie made a Halloween film. 2 of them, actually. And the only lesson learned from those films is that one man's white trash is another man's treasure. And both of those men are Rob Zombie. And then we finally got around to the most recent timeline with Halloween 2018, which had sequels, Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends. I've seen some people call it the H40 timeline since it's a similar idea to H20. Which also proves that when the studio said they wanted something new, they really just meant they wanted something used, but in a new package. The trilogy features Laurie Strode, who has to once again face Michael Myers in Mortal Kombat, an unstoppable murder machine versus a woman in her golden years. And he lost. It was fun while it lasted, but he better get back to training before it's time for the rematch in H60.
Cardio, training, weightlifting. You know, I do it all. I cut off all distractions.
Well, I think that's all of the dead timelines of most of the major franchises. You might be thinking, wait, there's definitely some timelines or franchises you missed. And that's probably true, but it might be that they weren't included because they're part of a smaller category that's next that I would call the questionable status category. These are timelines that are neither dead nor alive, or they have conflicting information out there. So let's jump straight into the best example I have for this small category. The Evil Dead franchise. The original timeline with Ash ended with Army of Darkness originally, but was later continued with the television show Ash vs. Evil Dead, which ended with Ash seemingly now in an apocalyptic future. And with no follow-up to that TV show up in the works, that sounds like a dead timeline. Then there was also that remake in 2013 that hasn't received a direct sequel since its release, which sounds like another dead timeline. But then we fast forward to this year, and the Evil Dead franchise did release a new film, Evil Dead Rise, which also doesn't seem like a direct sequel to anything. But the director of Evil Dead Rise and Bruce Campbell, the actor who plays Ash, have both stated that all 3 films are still possibly in the same timeline. The theory is because Army of Darkness revealed 3 Necronomicons, there's one for Ash in the originals, there's one for Mia in the 2013 remake, and there's one that the family found in Evil Dead Rise. So that confirms it, right? It's all in one timeline. Well, technically, sure, but the films never depict this connection. We can all believe the films are in the same universe, but if the films are never going to do anything with it, then it's the same thing as not being connected at all. This vagueness is exactly why I put it in the questionable status section. I still love everything about this franchise, but I have no idea what to expect from it. Another franchise that's also in a questionable position is the Predator franchise. I'm assuming the studios have always wanted to make sequels based on the first film, but Arnold has never seemed interested, or at least hasn't received enough money to be interested. I wouldn't mind seeing Arnold come back one more time, but his return hasn't been what I really cared about. If you had asked me 2 years ago, I would have told you the only options you had were to give me a sequel to Predators from 2010 or throw the franchise away. But then Prey happened, and I won't lie to you, fam, I was a certified hater when I heard there was no way that film was going to be good if it's going direct to streaming. Then it released, and I watched a predator fight a bear. It was absolute fire, and now I hear that fans are saying that it should become an anthology series of different predators hunting in various places and time periods, like World War II soldiers versus predators, or a predator versus pirates. But no matter what, I'm fine with pretty much anything except a sequel to 2018's The Predator. This next one might seem a little confusing, but the Scream franchise has never had a reboot. Every single film exists in the same timeline, but the key word there was film, because our next questionable timeline is the Scream television show. 3 seasons to be exact. If you haven't seen it, you should know that it definitely has its fans, and I'm one of them. I specifically thought that seasons 1 and 2 were really fun, and I especially think that season 2 was really good. Noah was a great television Randy replacement, and I actually think Brooke is one of the best characters the Scream franchise has had, period. But unfortunately, the show is currently in one of those situations where it's pretty much confirmed dead. But my reasoning for putting it in questionable is because it lived and died before Scream had actually made a return with Scream 5. This show was made for MTV back in 2015, and it didn't even feature the Fun World mask until season 3. But Scream is doing big numbers today, and experimentation with things like streaming and video games is inevitable. And as you'll soon find out later in this video, TV series are being taken way more serious as the potential playground for our favorite horror icons. I definitely credit Chucky's success for showing that you can definitely have just as much fun on TV with the right direction and passion behind a project. So I have some optimism that someone at Paramount might take another look at the still active fan base for the return of the TV show. And that's all the franchises that are currently active that are in a questionable place. So let's talk about the future of some of these franchises. Since we mentioned Chucky in that last section, let's talk about Chucky. Chucky is, in my opinion, one of, if not the, most consistent franchises in horror. I know some of you don't like Bride or Seed of Chucky, but I just like Chucky's personality too much to feel the same. And I'm glad to see that he continues to succeed, even on television with the upcoming release of season 3. He's just such an easy character to develop a fan base around, just like a Freddy Krueger, unlike a Jason who's just a silent brute. And I'm surprised he's never gotten a video game, considering kids today even seem to love the guy just as much. Also, wink wink at a future video if you pay attention to what I do on this channel. And speaking of video games, Texas Chainsaw Massacre recently got one, and it seems to have been a hit with critics and fans. Now, can't say the same for the Netflix requel they brought out in 2022. That film was so dumb, but I can't lie. It was the kind of dumb that's fun for me. Leatherface was over there just snapping wrists and stabbing people with their own bones and chainsawing a bus full of influencers. That's some Jason and Michael stuff right there. Which isn't what Leatherface is supposed to be, but it's definitely more entertaining than whatever Texas Chainsaw 3D was.
Do your thing, cuz.
I think my opinion is that if they made a sequel, I'd watch it. But I'm expecting to be disappointed. But the truth is, all Netflix has to do, and I know it's a long shot, is to somehow convince Matthew McConaughey to come back for a sequel. If they do that and it works out, you're welcome, Netflix. Speaking of returning for a sequel, the Scream franchise is gearing up for its 7th film soon. Obviously, the question on some people's mind is Sydney gonna appear in 7? And I think that's a boring question, honestly. If the story is right for her to return, sure, go ahead and put her in it. But if it's purely because fans want to see her in danger for the 6th time, don't bother. I think the better question people have wondered is what happens after 7? They made Scream 1 through 3, and then they made 4 with the plans for it to be a trilogy, but they didn't follow through. And now we're getting 5 through 7 as the next trilogy. But what happens when we get to 8? Is 8 gonna be like a series finale film where everything goes down and no one is safe? Or is it gonna be a new cast and a new trilogy? It's an interesting position for the franchise to be in, especially given that it's having its resurgence right now. But I'll admit it doesn't matter because I'm an extremely biased stan for this franchise, so even if they do something that I think sucks, like bringing Stu back, I'll still watch it.
Just like me anyway. I ain't telling you to be Michael Myers. I'm playing Michael Myers.
Peanut butter, jelly, Halloween, Michael Myers. Two combinations that are simple, yet effective. And with the recent end to the H40 timeline, the question is obviously, what now? Jason Blum, the producer of the recent trilogy, says he has no idea what the plans are, film-wise at least, because they literally made a film called Halloween Ends. But that hasn't stopped people from looking elsewhere. Rumors are starting to appear that a bidding war has started for a Halloween TV show, and there's even rumors that a game is coming. The rumors around the TV show is that A24 is supposedly the frontrunner for that TV show. And I'm gonna keep it 100 with y'all. That is not what I wanna hear. A24 is anything but simple. When I hear A24, I think about nuance and depth, slow burn type of horror. The whole point of Michael is that we didn't need to see 5 episodes of him in therapy sessions. So hopefully there's something here that I'm missing. Or maybe A24 enjoyed the success of X and is willing to produce a full-blown slasher TV show. Who knows?
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
The Alien franchise is supposedly getting a sequel by Fede Alvarez, the guy who made the 2013 remake of Evil Dead, and also helped, I think, produce the Texas Chainsaw requel. But I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm 50-50 on the Alien franchise. I like Alien and Aliens. I kinda like Alien Resurrection. But other than that, like, I didn't care for Prometheus. I didn't care for, what was it, Alien Covenant. But luckily, Alvarez does tend to take it back to the simplicity. So hopefully this is just like a straight up horror with the xenomorphs. So if that works out, I'm back on board with the franchise.
You don't know me, but I know you. I want to play a game.
The Saw franchise just released Saw X. Reviews are solid. Box office is probably going to be good. I'm not a huge fan of this franchise, but man, you gotta give credit where credit is due. In horror, it's so common for sequels to just ignore or retcon what previous films have done, but not with Saw. Those writers will make a plot out of everything. Did a character accidentally sneeze and cause a death in Saw 11? Well, guess what? In Saw 15, you're gonna find out that it's because Jigsaw secretly released black pepper into his air vents 8 movies ago because he saw that the victim doesn't season his food and thinks it's time he learns to enjoy the spices of life. That level of commitment to continuity is commendable. And honestly, I think the continuous plot of the films just proves that Saw would work as a TV show as well. And I even think the games weren't horrible. And with the right developer, I think those could return as well. The franchise is just absolutely in a great position. Let's talk about the Final Destination franchise. The next film is already in the works, and they've hinted that it'll be a reboot and go into more detail on Tony Todd's strange character. I don't need them to do that. Please don't. His character being so uniquely informed about the actions of death was always more fun because I didn't know anything about it. Was he the devil? Was he just a guy who has seen enough death to know the rules? Don't take that mystery away from me. Instead, what I think the franchise should try, because they've tried it before and it was actually really interesting, is something that's exclusive to the Final Destination 3 film. The DVD release of that film had a choose-your-own-adventure style version of the film, and I thought it was so awesome. And I also remember that Netflix was playing with that idea with some of their shows. So I would love to see a full Final Destination choose-your-own-adventure film. So Netflix, if you're listening to this video, which you're probably not, easy money.
You are all my children now.
The tough pill that needs to be swallowed is that Robert ain't coming back. He's already said he's done and that you're getting a cameo at best from him. It's not his fault that he crushed his role so hard that you can't easily replace him. But if there's any horror icon that's worth fighting for a return to the big screen, it's Freddy Krueger. He has just so much more creative potential than the other icons of horror because of his powers.
Oh, my God.
Jason ain't doing too hot either, despite what you might have heard about the lawsuit being settled and things are in the works. There hasn't been any news on his big screen return other than, "It's gonna happen, trust me, bro." The only real announcement that we've gotten with actual details is that there's a prequel show in the works featuring Pamela Voorhees, and it's being produced by A24 and Victor Miller, the original writer of Friday the 13th, who won the lawsuit. The fact that a teaser for a new Jason film was posted, then quickly removed by New Line a while ago, but all those details for the TV show are out, it tells me that there's still some behind the scenes drama going on here. Maybe I'm wrong, and they just wanted to give the show a chance to build up the new Jason before he makes his film return. But whatever needs to be done for these two franchises to come back, do it. Because with the right planning from the start, being able to build towards another Freddy vs. Jason is basically a cheat code for free money. You could even throw Ash in there like the comic books did. Before we end this video, I wanted to make sure I show some love to some of the new horror franchises that are starting to sprout up. One of them is the Mia Goth and Ty West trilogy. That's X, Pearl, and the upcoming Maxine. I didn't like X as much as a lot of you did, but I thought Pearl was fantastic. The quick succession of their releases is also pretty wild. If Maxine turns out to be great, this trilogy will have cemented itself in the minds of many horror fans as one of the greatest trilogies in horror. This one isn't a franchise yet, but it absolutely will be, and that's Make It. This doll is a force to be reckoned with, y'all. It's made almost as much as the entire Child's Play box office with a single film. It might be time to give Chucky the upgrades that Jason got and start pitching a Chucky vs. Megan crossover. I'm not gonna lie to you, I just want more horror crossovers. And last, but certainly not least, is a franchise that some people might find hard to watch. Maybe you saw the first one on Netflix, thought the clown looked spooky, and you sat down to watch, only to find out that this clown is very brutal and very mean-spirited, and he's not afraid to pull out the blicky to solve his problems. Well, that guy, he got a sequel, and it has, without question, what I would call the longest, most spite-driven kill I have ever seen put to film. The girl that the kill happens to didn't do anything to deserve the level of treatment that she gets. I was in the theater seeing it a second time, and I was dying laughing when that scene came up. Seeing and hearing everybody's reaction to the fact that this girl was just getting absolutely destroyed, it was hilarious. And they're already planning a third film. This is true icon in the making stuff. And now the video is basically over, and I know I'm gonna get comments about things I've missed, but before we do that, I just wanted to say some other things, like a little lightning round for stuff that I didn't care much about. The Conjuring and Insidious franchises, they're doing their thing, but I don't really watch supernatural stuff, so I don't got anything positive or negative to say, and that's why they weren't in this video. Hellraiser got a reboot, but I'm not a Hellraiser fan, so I don't know if the fans enjoyed it or not and are anticipating a sequel or anything. Wrong Turn had a reboot in 2021. It wronged and it turned, just as good as any other Wrong Turn film, which isn't saying much. Jeepers Creepers Reborn killed my family, stole my firstborn, and burned down my village. At least that's what it felt like after watching it. Go ahead and give me your thoughts about the upcoming projects or things you want to see if I didn't mention them. If there's anything you think I should pay attention to in the future, feel free to mention them below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe because I asked you nicely. And if you don't, next time I won't be asking.